Introduction of Emily Montgomery. Emily Montgomery had always prided herself on her ability to control everything in her life. As a successful bank executive, she was the epitome of corporate success, driven, ambitious, and with a sharp eye for detail. For years, she had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, believing that her success defined her worth. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and financial reports. She thrived in the fast-paced world of business, where everything was meticulously planned and calculated. But one fateful morning, everything changed. The email came as a shock, an announcement of massive layoffs across the company, and Emily's name was on the list. The news hit her like a freight train. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, unable to comprehend the reality of it. She had devoted her entire life to her career, but now it seemed like it had all come to an abrupt end. The email didn't just deliver bad news, it shattered her sense of identity. For the first time in years, Emily found herself at a crossroads. Without her job, she felt adrift, like a boat without a rudder. The stability she had once relied on had been taken away, and in its place, there was nothing but uncertainty. A decision to leave. After the initial shock wore off, Emily realized that she couldn't stay in the city. The bustle of the corporate world felt suffocating now, a constant reminder of the life she had lost. So she made a decision: she would leave it all behind. She would go to a small town, far away from the hustle and stress of her old life, where she could find some peace and perhaps even some answers. Havenbrook, a quiet little town that she had once visited briefly for a business trip, seemed like the perfect place. There, she could escape the pressures of her former life and take some time to rediscover herself. She rented a small, cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, far from the distractions of the city. It wasn't much, but it was all she needed. For the first time in years, Emily was going to slow down, take a step back, and attempt to rebuild her life. A new beginning. The first days in Havenbrook were strangely quiet. The town was small, its streets lined with quaint houses and local shops. People here didn't rush around with their heads down. Instead, they greeted each other on the sidewalks, exchanging smiles and small talk. Emily, in her sleek corporate clothes and carefully curated image, felt out of place. The simplicity of the town was both comforting and unsettling. She spent her days walking through the town, trying to absorb the peacefulness that seemed to seep into everything. The air was fresh, the people friendly, and the pace of life slow. Yet, despite the serenity around her, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had no plans, no meetings to attend, and no goals to achieve. For the first time in years, there was nothing to focus on but herself. And that, more than anything, was terrifying. As the days stretched into weeks, Emily realized that her life had been built on constant motion, always striving, always achieving. Now she had nothing to strive for, and that left a hollow feeling inside her. Who was she without her job? What did she want from life now? The question of what matters. It wasn't long before Emily found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. What had she really been working for all these years? Was success truly defined by status, power, and money? Or was there something more, something simpler, that she had been missing? The questions began to plague her, but she had no answers. Havenbrook was supposed to be a place for reflection, but instead, it was turning into a place of uncertainty. As the first month passed, Emily had begun to feel that her decision to leave everything behind might have been more complicated than she had anticipated. But despite the challenges, she knew one thing for certain: she needed to keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the path might be. In the stillness of Havenbrook, Emily was about to embark on a journey, not just to rebuild her career, but to rediscover herself and uncover the things that truly mattered in life. A quiet town and unexpected encounters. Life in Havenbrook had begun to settle into a quiet routine for Emily. The days were slow, and the quiet rhythm of the town became something she started to embrace, despite the occasional pang of loneliness. She spent her mornings at the local cafe, sipping coffee while reading the newspaper, trying to catch up on the world she'd left behind. The afternoons were filled with walks through the streets, as she explored her new surroundings and began to learn the names of the few people she had met. Though the town felt peaceful, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. In her old life, she had been surrounded by colleagues, clients, and friends, people with whom she had shared countless hours of meetings and events. But now, there was only silence, broken by the occasional chatter of the locals. One afternoon, while walking down the main street, Emily's attention was drawn to a small, charming hardware store at the corner of the block. It was an old building, its wood-paneled walls showing the marks of time. The sign hanging above the door read Tom's Hardware, in faded letters. Curious, Emily stepped inside. The quiet shopkeeper. Inside, the shop was cluttered with various tools, paints, and gardening supplies. The air smelled of wood and fresh paint, and the quiet hum of a radio playing soft country tunes filled the space. Emily walked down the aisles, admiring the simple and rustic nature of the store, when she noticed the man behind the counter. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a worn-out denim shirt and a cap perched on his head. His hands were rough, calloused from years of hard work, and his face was rugged but kind. He looked up from the stack of boxes he was arranging, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. "Can I help you with something, miss?" he asked in a deep, gravelly voice, his smile warm and inviting. Emily was taken aback by his down-to-earth demeanor. He wasn't at all like the polished, professional men she was used to from her former life. His casual, easygoing attitude felt like a stark contrast to the tense, competitive environment she had come from. "I'm just looking around," she replied, offering a smile in return. "I'm new to town." "Well, welcome to Havenbrook," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I'm Tom, by the way. If you need anything, just let me know." Emily nodded, grateful for his kindness. She wasn't used to being treated with such simplicity and ease. There was no agenda here, no expectation, just a genuine offer of help. A growing friendship. Over the next few weeks, Emily found herself returning to Tom's hardware store more often. She wasn't necessarily in need of tools, but there was something comforting about the steady presence of Tom. He had a quiet way about him that was soothing, and each time she came in, they would chat about anything and everything, his work, her life, and the occasional tidbit of gossip from the town. Tom was an open book. He had grown up in Havenbrook, worked at the hardware store since he was a teenager, and had never felt the need to leave. There was no rush in his life. No big city dreams, no corporate ladder to climb, just the simple satisfaction of living each day, doing what he loved. Emily, on the other hand, found herself torn. Her old life in the city was a world of ambition and expectation, but it had left her feeling empty. Tom, though, was different. He didn't seem to have any of those worries. He was content with his life, unencumbered by the pressures that had once weighed so heavily on her. One afternoon, as Emily was browsing the shelves, Tom appeared beside her, holding a small plant. "You ever try gardening?" he asked, his face breaking into a grin. "It's good for clearing the mind." Emily laughed softly, surprised by the suggestion. "I can't say I have. My life has been more about spreadsheets than soil." Tom chuckled, his eyes lighting up. "Well, sometimes the best way to clear the clutter in your head is to get your hands dirty." His words struck something deep inside her. She had spent so many years trying to control every aspect of her life, but here was someone who found peace in the simplicity of a garden, a place where there was no need to rush or plan. It was a foreign concept to her. "Maybe I'll give it a try," she said with a hesitant smile. The unlikely friendship. As time went on, Emily found herself drawn more and more to Tom's grounded perspective. He had a way of making her feel like the world wasn't so complicated, that maybe she didn't need all the answers right away. His presence was calming, and though their conversations were often light and casual, they carried an underlying depth. One evening, as Emily left the store after another brief visit, she found herself thinking about Tom's words. Maybe she didn't need to have it all figured out. Maybe it was okay to just be. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of peace that wasn't tied to accomplishments or goals. It was simply the comfort of being around someone who didn't expect anything from her. And that, she realized, was something she had never truly experienced before. Emily didn't know it yet, but Tom would play a crucial role in her journey toward understanding what really mattered in life. And as she began to open herself up to the idea of true connection, she found herself questioning what was more valuable, living for the future, or learning to appreciate the present. The struggle to let go. As the days passed, Emily found herself spending more time in Havenbrook. Her routine remained simple: mornings at the cafe, afternoons walking through the town, and frequent visits to Tom's hardware store. Each visit, though, was slightly different. She noticed that Tom's presence made her feel more grounded, more aware of her surroundings, and less absorbed by her past life. But something was also happening beneath the surface. Emily was trying to let go of her old self, the high-powered executive, always racing against the clock, always chasing the next promotion, the next deal, the next success. But that identity had been with her for so long that shedding it wasn't as easy as she had hoped. The fear of losing everything she had worked for still lingered, an invisible weight on her shoulders. When she stood in Tom's hardware store, running her fingers across the wood of the shelves, she could feel that pull, that desire to return to what was familiar. She was used to making decisions based on logic, on figures and forecasts, not on the quiet simplicity that Tom embodied. It was difficult to reconcile her past with the present, to find a balance between the woman she had been and the one she was becoming. The challenge of change. One afternoon, Emily returned to the hardware store, hoping to distract herself from the unease that had settled in her chest. Tom was standing behind the counter, as usual, sorting through a stack of receipts. When he saw her, he greeted her with his usual warmth, and she returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good to see you again," Tom said, his voice gentle. "You're looking a little tired today." Emily nodded, surprised by how well he could read her. "I guess I am. It's just, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, you know? I thought coming to Havenbrook would give me some clarity, but instead I just feel lost." Tom paused, putting down the receipts. He studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "It's okay to feel lost sometimes. Sometimes, you have to be lost to find your way. But the key is to not be afraid of it. You're in a new place, a new chapter of your life. It's not always going to feel comfortable." Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wanted to believe him, but change wasn't easy for her. The structure, the drive, the purpose she had once found in her job, those had defined her for so long. Without them, she felt like she was floundering, unsure of who she was anymore. Tom seemed so at peace with himself, with his life in Havenbrook. How had he gotten to that place? And why couldn't she? "I envy you, you know," Emily said quietly, almost to herself. "You seem so content. I don't know if I'll ever get there." Tom's eyes softened, and he stepped closer to the counter, resting his hands on it. "Contentment doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And it's not about finding some big answer. It's about being present in the moment. About appreciating the small things, like a cup of coffee in the morning or a quiet evening. You don't have to figure it all out right away, Emily. Sometimes, you just have to let go and trust that things will fall into place." The unfamiliar comfort. Despite her lingering doubts, there was something comforting in Tom's words. The pressure she had been placing on herself, this need to figure everything out, to rush toward something, began to feel less important. She had spent so many years chasing after success, after achievements that were recognized by others, but now in this quiet town, she realized how little of that actually mattered. That evening, after leaving the hardware store, Emily took a different route home. She walked along the creek that ran through the town, listening to the soft rush of water and watching the sun dip low on the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of pink and orange, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a small spark of peace inside her. It wasn't the overwhelming sense of certainty she had been expecting, but it was something new, a quiet recognition that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to have everything figured out right away. As she walked, she thought about Tom's words. She thought about the way he moved through life so effortlessly, without the constant push and pull of ambition that had been a part of her every day for so long. He didn't have the wealth, the titles, or the recognition she once valued, but he had something else, something that felt far more valuable. The unease of vulnerability. The next few days were filled with a strange mix of emotions. Emily continued her quiet routine in Havenbrook, but now, she found herself observing people more closely. She watched how they interacted, how they lived with ease and contentment. It made her realize how much of her old life had been consumed by competition, by the drive to always do more, to be more. One evening, Tom invited her to join him at a local gathering, a small potluck dinner that some of the townspeople had organized. Emily hesitated at first. Social events weren't her thing, and she wasn't sure she was ready to open herself up to yet another new experience. But something about Tom's invitation made her want to try. When she arrived, she was surprised by how warm and welcoming the group was. It wasn't a grand affair, just a few neighbors gathered around a table, sharing simple homemade dishes and laughing together. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was part of something. She wasn't a bank executive here, just another person in the room, enjoying the moment. But even as she engaged in the conversation, a small voice inside her told her she didn't quite belong. She was still the outsider, the newcomer who hadn't yet shed the skin of her old life. It wasn't that the people were unkind, they were warm, open, and genuine. But Emily couldn't help but feel like an imposter in this world of simplicity and connection. The beginning of transformation. As she left the gathering that night, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something important. She wasn't sure what that something was yet, but she could sense that the life she had known, the life that had defined her, was slipping away. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a loss. It was the beginning of something new, something different, and the uncertainty she had felt before began to shift. Maybe, just maybe, the challenge wasn't in letting go. Maybe it was in allowing herself to embrace the quiet, the simplicity, and the vulnerability that came with it. But the journey was far from over. And Emily knew deep down that there were still many more lessons to learn before she could truly find the peace Tom had spoken of. A new rhythm. As the weeks passed in Havenbrook, Emily began to sense a shift within herself. The restless energy that had once defined her was gradually replaced by a quieter, more reflective rhythm. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was beginning to feel right. She still missed her fast-paced life. At times, the absence of deadlines, goals, and constant movement made her feel unmoored. But she had come to realize that peace wasn't found in the frantic pursuit of achievement. It was something more subtle, something that grew in the spaces between the noise. She had started gardening, as Tom had suggested. At first, it had felt like an attempt to fill the empty time with something productive. She didn't know the first thing about plants, but the act of getting her hands into the soil, of tending to something small and fragile, was oddly therapeutic. There was a rhythm to it, a slow pace that forced her to focus on the present moment. The gentle touch of the earth, the quiet work of watering and pruning, it all became a meditation of sorts. Tom would often stop by to check on her progress, offering simple advice. "Don't rush it," he'd say. "Plants grow in their own time." At first, Emily had wanted quick results. She was used to measurable success, to seeing tangible outcomes for her efforts. But Tom's words stuck with her. The more she worked with the garden, the more she realized that there was no rushing growth, whether it was in a plant or in herself. A moment of doubt. One morning, as she was tending to her flowers, Emily found herself gazing out over the garden, her hands resting still in the soil. She had planted the seeds weeks ago, and now, the first small shoots were beginning to peek through the ground. They were fragile, delicate, and still too small to be anything impressive. But something inside her stirred. She realized she had been expecting the garden to reflect the same pace as her old life. Fast, efficient, and always improving. But this was different. These plants were growing at their own pace, without her interference, and they were still beautiful in their fragility. Tom appeared in the yard, as he often did during his breaks. "Looks like you've got a nice little garden coming along," he said, his voice casual but warm. He leaned against the fence, observing her work with a smile. "I'm not sure it's enough," Emily replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "I thought it would grow faster. I thought I'd see more of a change." Tom chuckled softly and walked closer to her. "The best things don't happen overnight. You're trying to rush it, just like you've been trying to rush everything else. Remember, things take time. It's not about getting to the finish line, it's about enjoying the process." Emily looked down at the plants, a slight frown on her face. She wasn't sure she understood it fully, but there was something in Tom's voice that made her pause. He wasn't just talking about the garden. He was talking about her life, about the way she had spent years pushing herself forward, always looking ahead, never allowing herself to simply be in the moment. "I guess I'm not very good at patience," she admitted quietly. Tom nodded. "Patience isn't about waiting around. It's about understanding that not everything can be controlled. Sometimes, you've just got to trust the process and let things unfold." The gift of time. In the days that followed, Emily continued to visit the garden daily, watching the plants slowly grow and bloom. It was a humbling experience. Each day she would stand for a few moments and just observe, noticing the changes in the flowers, the way the petals curled outwards, the way the leaves unfurled in response to the sunlight. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. And it was beautiful. It reminded her of her own journey. She had expected to find all the answers quickly, to immediately feel a sense of peace and contentment. But peace, she was beginning to understand, didn't work that way. It wasn't something that could be achieved by simply checking off a list of goals. It was something that grew gradually, through time, patience, and an openness to the present. Tom's lessons had started to sink in, even if they didn't always come easily. It wasn't about forcing herself to change, it was about giving herself the time and space to allow change to happen naturally. And sometimes, that meant being okay with the discomfort of uncertainty. There was no quick fix, no overnight solution. It was a slow process, and Emily was learning to accept that. A deepening connection. The more Emily spent time with Tom, the more she began to understand the quiet strength he carried with him. He wasn't flashy or outspoken, but there was a depth to him that was hard to ignore. He didn't seem to care much for the things Emily had once valued, status, titles, or recognition. Instead, he valued things that Emily had long dismissed as insignificant: a good cup of coffee in the morning, a conversation with a friend, the satisfaction of a hard day's work. One evening, after helping him unload a delivery at the store, Emily stood with Tom outside, looking up at the sky. The stars were particularly bright that night, scattered across the deep blue like tiny diamonds. "It's funny," Emily said, her voice thoughtful. "I used to think life was about achieving things, getting ahead. But now, I'm not so sure anymore. I thought I had to keep running, keep pushing. But maybe I've been running in the wrong direction all along." Tom glanced over at her, his expression gentle but knowing. "I think you're starting to figure it out," he said quietly. "Life isn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about being true to yourself and letting go of the things that don't really matter." For a moment, Emily stood in silence, the weight of his words settling inside her. She wasn't quite sure she was ready to fully embrace this new way of thinking, but she felt the shift within herself. It was a gradual transformation, like the flowers in her garden, slow but real. Embracing the process. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to let go of her expectations. She didn't push herself as hard anymore. Instead of forcing things to happen, she allowed herself to be present, to experience life without the pressure of achieving perfection. Her garden flourished, not in grand bursts of growth, but in small, steady steps. It was a beautiful lesson in patience, one that she was finally beginning to understand. Each time she visited Tom's hardware store, she felt a little lighter. The conversations between them had become deeper, more personal. She found herself sharing more of her thoughts and fears, and Tom listened with the same quiet understanding that had first drawn her to him. Emily knew she still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. It wasn't about rushing to an endpoint. It was about finding peace in the journey itself. And with every passing day, she was beginning to do just that. A visit from the past. The longer Emily stayed in Havenbrook, the more she began to embrace her new life. Her mornings had a gentle rhythm: coffee, a walk by the creek, time spent in her garden. She had even started volunteering at the local library, helping the librarian, Mrs. Simmons, organize events for the children. Emily had become part of the fabric of the town, albeit quietly. But despite her growing sense of belonging, there was still a lingering sense of unfinished business within her. One afternoon, as Emily was out for a walk, she spotted a familiar face approaching from the other direction. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but as the figure drew closer, her heart skipped a beat. It was Rachel, her former colleague and close friend from her banking days. Rachel's sharp features softened as she smiled at Emily, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "Emily? Is that really you?" Emily froze for a moment, caught off guard by the unexpected encounter. The last time she had seen Rachel, she was still the high-powered executive in the city, fully immersed in her work. Now, standing in the quiet streets of Havenbrook, Emily felt like a completely different person. "Rachel," Emily said, her voice tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the area for a business meeting," Rachel explained, her tone light. "I heard you had left the company, but I didn't expect to find you here, of all places. This is, well, different." Emily chuckled softly, trying to mask her unease. "Yeah, it's a lot different. I needed a change of pace, you know." Rachel studied Emily for a moment, as if trying to gauge whether this new life suited her. "I understand," she said finally. "But I can't help but wonder, how are you really doing? You seemed so driven back then, so focused. I can't imagine what it must feel like to just walk away from all of that." The burden of expectations. As they continued walking together, Rachel's questions seemed to linger in the air. She was probing, almost as if trying to make sense of Emily's decision to leave her old life behind. Emily could feel the weight of Rachel's expectations, even though she knew it wasn't intentional. Rachel had always been a go-getter, always striving for more, and she couldn't understand why Emily would choose something so far removed from that world. "It's been harder than I thought," Emily admitted, her voice quiet. "I left everything behind, my job, my life in the city, and sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. There are days when I feel like I've lost something important." Rachel nodded slowly, her eyes softening with understanding. "I can't imagine what it's like to walk away from all that you've worked for. But I also know that you've always been driven by more than just success. You've always cared about something deeper. Maybe you're just finding that again. You were always so busy, always running towards the next big thing. Maybe this is your chance to slow down and figure out what really matters to you." Emily smiled faintly at Rachel's words. It wasn't what she had expected to hear, but it was exactly what she needed. It wasn't easy to admit, but Emily was starting to understand that her drive for success had been fueled by something deeper, an unspoken need to prove her worth, to prove that she was capable of achieving everything she set her mind to. But in the process, she had lost sight of what truly mattered: confronting the past. As their conversation turned toward the old days, memories of late nights at the office, long hours spent on strategy meetings, Emily began to realize how much her old life had shaped her. She had worked tirelessly for the bank, focused on the climb, always striving for the next promotion, the next raise. She had convinced herself that her career was the most important thing, that success was the key to happiness. But standing here, in this quiet town, surrounded by people who didn't measure their worth by titles or achievements, Emily began to question everything she had once believed. The truth was, she hadn't been happy. Her relationships had suffered, her personal life had been neglected, and the constant pressure to achieve had left her feeling empty inside. She had been living for something external, validation from others, recognition in the workplace, but she had never taken the time to ask herself what she truly wanted. For the first time, Emily felt the weight of her past decisions. It wasn't just about walking away from her career. It was about the realization that she had allowed herself to be defined by her work, by her ability to climb higher, to achieve more. And now, standing in Havenbrook, she was faced with the uncomfortable truth that her identity had been built on something fragile, something that could disappear in an instant, as it had with her job. The decision to let go. That evening, as Emily sat on her porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, she reflected on the conversation with Rachel. It had been bittersweet, but it had also been a turning point. She realized that she couldn't keep holding on to the past, to the person she had been. It was time to let go. The next day, Emily took a long walk to the creek, as she often did to clear her mind. As she walked along the banks, she thought about the future. What did she want her life to look like now? Could she continue to let go of the expectations that had shaped her for so long? Could she live a life not defined by success or failure, but by the simple act of living authentically? The answer, she realized, was yes. It was time to stop running, to stop measuring her worth by what she had achieved. It was time to embrace the person she was becoming, the woman who was learning to appreciate the quiet moments, the small victories, and the relationships that truly mattered. Emily had come to Havenbrook in search of peace, and while it hadn't come easily, she was finally beginning to understand what that peace looked like. It wasn't about the job or the accolades. It was about embracing vulnerability, accepting that life was unpredictable, and allowing herself to simply be. And in that moment, standing at the edge of the creek, Emily felt a small but profound shift inside her. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was the beginning of something new, something real. She was ready to face the future, not as the woman who had once been defined by her job, but as the woman she was becoming, one step at a time. A new opportunity. The days in Havenbrook continued to unfold at a steady pace, each one adding a layer of peace to Emily's newfound life. Her garden blossomed, the community became more familiar, and she began to feel like she was part of something, even if it was just a small, quiet town. The sense of uncertainty she had carried with her from the city was slowly being replaced by a quiet confidence, one that had nothing to do with career or accomplishments. Then, just as she was starting to feel at home, life threw her an unexpected curveball. It was a Wednesday afternoon when she received the call. She had just finished helping Mrs. Simmons at the library when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Emily's voice was cautious, unsure. "Emily Montgomery?" The voice on the other end was familiar, but distant. "Yes," she replied, her heart rate picking up. "This is Andrew Jacobs. We met a few years ago when I was heading the regional banking division. I'm with the Southern Valley Bank now. We've been hearing a lot about your background, and we're looking for someone to help us with a new project. I know this might be unexpected, but we'd like to offer you a position." Emily's mind raced. A job offer. It was the last thing she expected, but the name of the bank, Southern Valley Bank, was one she recognized. It was one of the most reputable in the region. The position was well-paying, prestigious, and offered a chance to return to the career she had once loved. The old temptations, the familiar lure of success and recognition, began to stir within her. She took a deep breath, fighting the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I'm flattered by the offer, Andrew," she said carefully. "But I've been living in Havenbrook for the past few months, and I've made some significant changes in my life. I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to that world just yet." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I understand. But we're offering you a chance to lead a new initiative, Emily. You'd be overseeing the expansion of the bank into small-town markets, helping smaller communities thrive. It's not the corporate grind you're used to, it's about building relationships, bringing value to local communities. It's a different kind of challenge." Her heart skipped a beat. The idea of merging her corporate expertise with something that could genuinely benefit people felt different. It wasn't just about profit, it was about purpose. And that sparked something deep inside her. The temptation of return. As the days went by, the offer gnawed at her. It was tempting. The salary, the responsibility, the opportunity to do meaningful work, it was the kind of position she had spent years working toward. But there was another part of her, the part she had nurtured in Havenbrook, that wasn't sure if she could go back to that life. She had spent so many years identifying herself by her career, by what she could accomplish in the boardrooms and financial districts. But now she was finding fulfillment in something completely different, the simplicity of quiet mornings, community engagement, and being present in her own life. That night, Emily went to the hardware store, as she often did when she needed clarity. Tom was behind the counter as usual, sorting through a few boxes of new supplies. "Hey," Emily greeted him, a bit hesitantly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Tom looked up, his usual warmth lighting up his face. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain the dilemma that had taken hold of her. "I got a job offer today," she said slowly. "From a bank. They want me to help them expand into small-town markets. It sounds great. But I'm not sure if I should take it." Tom studied her with his steady gaze, not offering an opinion immediately. He simply let her talk. "I don't know," she continued, "it's the kind of job I always dreamed of. It's prestigious, meaningful in its own way. But I've been here in Havenbrook for a while now, and I've started to realize that there's more to life than titles and recognition. I've been learning to slow down, to find joy in the simple things. I don't know if I want to give that up." Tom leaned against the counter, his hands resting comfortably in front of him. "You've got to listen to yourself, Emily. What feels right for you? It's not about what sounds good on paper, it's about what you truly want. No matter what choice you make, it's got to be something that aligns with who you are now, not who you were before." Emily sighed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had worked so hard for years, driven by ambition and the desire to succeed. But now, in this quiet town, she had learned that success didn't always come from titles and external validation. It came from living authentically, from being present, and from making a difference in the lives of others, not just herself. But could she truly let go of her old life? Could she turn down an opportunity that so many would dream of? A moment of clarity. The next morning, Emily woke early, as she had grown accustomed to. She walked along the creek, feeling the cool morning air on her face. The world was quiet, still, and for a moment, everything felt right. As she walked, her mind sifted through the options, weighing them against what she had learned over the past few months. As the sun rose higher, something shifted inside her. It wasn't the job offer that mattered, it was the person she had become. She had spent so many years running after external validation, but now she realized that the validation she needed was from within. The peace she had found in Havenbrook was priceless. The relationships she had built, the sense of purpose that came from living authentically, were worth far more than any job title or salary. The answer, she realized, was simple. She didn't need to go back to the world she had left behind. She didn't need the corporate ladder to define her. She was capable of making a difference right where she was, in the community that had embraced her. A new direction. That afternoon, Emily called Andrew back. "I appreciate the offer," she said, her voice steady, "but I'm going to have to decline. I've realized that my path lies here, in Havenbrook. I found a sense of peace and purpose that I wasn't expecting, and I want to continue on that journey." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "I understand, Emily. I respect your decision. If you ever change your mind, the door will always be open." "Thank you, Andrew," Emily said with a smile. "I truly appreciate the opportunity, but I think I'm exactly where I need to be." As she hung up the phone, a sense of calm washed over her. The decision hadn't been easy, but it was the right one. She was choosing a life that was true to who she had become, not who she had once been. And for the first time in a long while, Emily Montgomery felt completely at peace with her choice. The pull of two worlds. The decision to stay in Havenbrook had brought Emily a profound sense of peace. It wasn't an easy choice, and there were still moments when the temptation of her former life, a life of prestige, success, and recognition, whispered to her. But each time that thought crept in, she reminded herself of what she had found in the quiet town: real connection, a sense of purpose, and a peace she never knew she had been searching for. But now, with the certainty of her choice came a new challenge. Tom had always been the steady presence in her life during this transition. They had spent more time together in the past few months than Emily had ever anticipated. His quiet strength, his patience, and his simple joy for life had drawn her in. She had begun to see him in a different light, not just as a friend, but as someone who had become a significant part of her life. Yet, despite the comfort he provided, Emily couldn't ignore the growing tension within herself. Tom had built his life in Havenbrook. He was rooted in this place, in the small-town pace, in the relationships that had formed over years of living simply. He had never expressed the desire to leave, never showed any ambition to move beyond his life in the town. And Emily, well, she had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated either. As much as she loved the town, and as much as she enjoyed Tom's company, she couldn't deny that a part of her still longed for something beyond the small-town life. She had spent years in the world of ambition and excitement, and though she had embraced her new slower pace, she couldn't ignore that fire inside her. She wasn't quite sure what she wanted yet, but she knew she needed more than what Havenbrook had to offer. A growing distance. One evening, as Emily walked through the town square, her mind wandered to all the possibilities that were still out there. She hadn't completely closed the door on change. After all, this wasn't the end of her journey, it was merely a new chapter. As she passed the cafe, she spotted Tom sitting at a table by the window. His posture was relaxed, his coffee cup resting in his hands. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, and for a moment, everything felt right. But then the uneasy feeling from earlier returned. Was she holding herself back by staying in Havenbrook? Could she really settle into this quiet life, knowing that a part of her still dreamed of something bigger? She approached him, forcing a smile as she sat down. "Hey," she greeted softly, trying to mask the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. "Hey there," Tom replied, his smile warm. "How was your day?" "Good," she said, her voice a little distant. "Busy with the library. You know, the usual." Tom studied her face, noticing the subtle tension in her posture. "Is everything okay?" His voice was concerned, but gentle. Emily hesitated, unsure how to put into words what she had been feeling for the past few days. She wanted to tell him, but the truth felt complicated, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to say it out loud. "Yeah, it's just, I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, the words coming out slower than she intended. "About where I'm headed, about what I want from life. I found so much peace here, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to put down roots in one place. I feel like there's still something more out there for me." Tom listened in silence, his face unreadable for a moment. He set his coffee cup down, his hands resting on the table. "You're not sure if you can stay here, are you?" Emily's heart sank. She hadn't meant for it to sound so final, but somehow, that was what it had come across as. "I don't know. I'm still figuring it out," she replied quietly, avoiding his gaze. Tom's expression softened, but there was a subtle sadness in his eyes. "I get it, Emily. I do. This town isn't for everyone. And you're not the same person who came here a few months ago. You've changed. But it doesn't mean that staying here has to mean giving up on yourself. You can still have a future, you know." Emily nodded, her chest tightening. She had known that her time in Havenbrook was never meant to be permanent. But she also hadn't anticipated that the bond between her and Tom would grow so deep. She wasn't ready to face the possibility of leaving him behind. "Not yet. I'm not sure what I want yet," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "But I feel like I'm stuck between two worlds." The unspoken fear. As they sat together in silence, Emily realized that her fear wasn't just about leaving the town, it was about leaving Tom. She had found someone who understood her, someone who had been there for her when everything else seemed uncertain. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was outgrowing this life. Tom's quiet strength had been her anchor, but she couldn't let it become a reason to stay somewhere she wasn't fully at peace. She didn't want to settle for comfort if it meant sacrificing the growth she still longed for. But that didn't make the decision any easier. Tom reached across the table and gently took her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. "You don't have to decide anything right now, Emily. I'm not going anywhere. But you should do what feels right for you. No matter where you go, you'll always have a place here. And if it turns out that this is where you want to be, then I'll be here." Emily's throat tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She wanted to say so much, to express the confusion in her heart, the love she felt for him, and the uncertainty that still plagued her. But instead, she simply nodded, grateful for his understanding, even if she wasn't ready to make sense of everything herself. The distance between them. Over the next few days, Emily spent more time reflecting on what Tom had said. She spent time by the creek in her garden, and at the library, trying to center herself. The world around her had started to feel smaller again, as though Havenbrook was beginning to wrap itself around her like a blanket. But as comforting as it was, she couldn't ignore the pull of something else, the need for adventure, for a future that was still uncertain but full of possibility. As for Tom, he continued his daily life, always kind, always steady. But Emily sensed a change in him too. It wasn't anything he said, it was in the way he looked at her, in the moments of silence that now stretched between them. There was a tension between them that neither of them had acknowledged, but both felt. The path ahead of her felt unclear, but one thing was certain, Emily couldn't stay in the limbo between two worlds forever. She would have to make a choice, and that choice would shape her future. The quiet resolution. Late one evening, as Emily stood on her porch, watching the stars twinkle above the quiet town, she made a decision. It wasn't an easy one, but it was the only one she could make. She needed to step into the unknown, to continue her journey beyond the small-town life she had come to love. She needed to embrace the uncertainty and trust that it would lead her to the right place. She wasn't running away from Havenbrook, or from Tom. She was running toward herself, the person she was becoming, the person she wanted to be. The next morning, Emily would tell Tom what she had decided. She couldn't stay stuck in the past, and she couldn't live her life in two worlds. It was time to move forward, no matter where that took her. And with that thought, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. It was time to take the next step. A new beginning. Emily awoke early the next morning, the soft light of dawn filtering through the window, casting gentle shadows across the room. She lay there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had led her to this point, her time in Havenbrook, the lessons she had learned, and the person she had become. The path that had once seemed so uncertain was now unfolding in front of her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next. As she dressed and prepared for the day, Emily felt a quiet sense of clarity. The decision she had made was not an easy one, but it was hers. She had spent months in Havenbrook, rediscovering parts of herself she had lost in the rush of her former life. She had found peace here, true, but now it was time to move forward, to seek out new challenges and new possibilities. It wasn't about running away from Havenbrook or from Tom, it was about moving toward her future. And so, with a steady heart, she walked to the hardware store. She knew what she had to do. She needed to talk to Tom, to explain her decision. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. Tom had been there for her when she needed someone to anchor her, but now, she had to let go and move on, even if it meant stepping into the unknown without him by her side. The conversation. When Emily entered the store, she saw Tom behind the counter, just as he had been countless times before. He looked up as she walked in, his eyes soft and warm, but there was a certain heaviness in his gaze that told her he knew this moment was coming. He had always been perceptive, always able to read between the lines of what was being said. "Morning," Emily said, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of the conversation ahead. "Morning," Tom replied, his tone warm but cautious. "You seem different today. Everything okay?" Emily took a deep breath, walking over to the counter where he stood. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, gathering the words she had rehearsed in her mind. "Tom, I've been thinking a lot about where I'm headed, and I've come to a decision. I need to leave Havenbrook." Tom didn't react immediately, but she could see the flicker of understanding in his eyes. He wasn't surprised, and yet the quiet sadness that passed over his face made her heart ache. "I've learned so much here, more than I ever expected," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "You've taught me things I didn't know I needed to learn, about patience, about living in the moment. But there's still a part of me that feels like I need to explore, to see more of the world and understand who I am in it. I can't stay here, as much as I love it." Tom nodded slowly, taking in her words. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I knew this day would come. You've changed, Emily. You're not the same woman who walked into this town all those months ago. And while I wish you could stay, I know you have to do what's right for you." Emily's throat tightened as she struggled to hold back the tears. She had known this conversation would be difficult, but hearing the understanding in Tom's voice made it even harder to bear. She had come to care for him deeply, but she couldn't ignore the fact that she still had a journey ahead of her, one that couldn't be completed while staying in Havenbrook. "I don't want to leave you behind, Tom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've been everything to me during this time. I don't think I could have made it without you." Tom reached across the counter, gently taking her hand in his. "And you won't be alone, Emily. You'll always have a place here. But I understand that you need to go. And I want you to go, to find what's out there for you. I don't want to hold you back." The words were simple, but they were exactly what she needed to hear. Tom's kindness, his unwavering support, made the pain of leaving feel a little more bearable. She wasn't running away from him or from the life they had shared, she was running toward her own future. The final goodbye. The next few days were a blur of goodbyes and farewells. Emily packed up her cottage, making sure to leave behind only what she truly needed. It was a strange feeling, this process of closing one chapter and preparing to open another. The town, the people, the quiet moments that had helped her rediscover herself, everything was a part of her now. And yet, it was time to leave it behind. On her final morning in Havenbrook, Emily stood on her porch, looking out over the town. The sky was clear, the sun rising over the horizon, casting golden light across the streets she had come to know so well. She closed her eyes, taking in the peaceful silence, and for a moment, she allowed herself to simply be. Tom arrived just before she left, as he had promised. He stood beside her, the quiet companionship between them comforting in its simplicity. They didn't speak at first, words weren't necessary. They had said everything that needed to be said. Finally, Emily turned to him, her voice steady but soft. "Thank you, Tom. For everything. I'll never forget this place, and I'll never forget you." "You don't have to thank me," Tom replied, his voice low. "You've taught me just as much as I've taught you. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Emily nodded, her heart full of gratitude. She reached out and gave him a final hug, holding on to the connection they had shared, the bond that had helped her heal and grow. When they pulled apart, there was no more sadness, just a quiet understanding between them. It was time for her to go, but their paths had crossed for a reason. And that was enough. As she climbed into her car and drove away from Havenbrook, Emily felt the weight of the decision lift from her shoulders. She wasn't sure where she was headed, or what the future would hold. But for the first time in a long while, she felt free to explore, to grow, to take the next step in her journey. The road ahead was uncertain, but Emily was ready to embrace it. She had learned that the quiet path wasn't about running away, it was about finding the courage to move forward, to trust herself, and to live authentically, no matter where life took her. And so, with a final glance in the rearview mirror at the town that had helped her rediscover who she was, Emily drove toward her new beginning, knowing that her story was just beginning, and the path ahead was hers to shape.